in her soul. Was it truly an absolute seed of extremity? Something like that had actually bloomed in her soul? He found that a great chunk of his authority and power turned exceedingly cold as she didn't lift a finger. Yet a maddening hyperversal extremity authority erupted from all around her and ascended towards the foreign hyperversal extremity, reaching out towards Noah. This whole region of reality instantly shattered as the will of hyperversal extremity Kabul on the other end was instantly alerted, becoming roused and trying to sink backwards into the aeonic annals of extremity to return to his body. His eyes were somber, as his actions shouldn't have been found out until after he completed what he wanted to. This was how he knew the authority of an adjudicator to work. If it wasn't actively in her vision when it occurred, she would find out about it within moments due to her authority as an adjudicator. She would know when the investiture of extremity was violated. By knowing this after it happened, was utterly fucking useless for the weaker life form attacked, while the more powerful one would be slapped on the wrist and set as an example for the future, telling others not to repeat such a thing again. This was why, even though it was something rarely done, hyperversal extremities, or apex aeonic life forms, who weren't actively under the gaze of the adjudicator, would be able to achieve their aims and only be punished after. But for hyperversal extremity Kabul to not even succeed, he found out. His somber volition turned below him as he saw the visage of the body of the being he was looking for. And on him he saw a smile. He instantly understood what had occurred. He was baited? He, a hyperversal extremity? Whom he was retreating ever faster across the aeonic annals of extremity as rage began to build within him. But this rage turned into shock a moment later as he felt his hyperversal extremity will suddenly stop its movement back towards his body. Thereafter, he actually felt it accelerate forward outside of his own control towards where he was escaping from. This wasn't all, as the thin strand of connection there was across the aeonic annals of extremity was pulled upon. His body in the Quasarian lands felt a tug as something unimaginable happened thereafter. In the domain that used to be Xiaomi's home, Zeitgeist was watching the hyperversal extremity Kabul's situated body in a hint of worry as a moment after crack! The plane around them splintered as a crack appeared tight above hyperversal extremity Kabul. Oof! A bellow was heard from his roused body and he tried to erupt with maddening hyperversal extremity authority. And yet it was as if an undeniable, invisible hand ahead appeared. The hyperversal extremity authority he was releasing instantly snuffed out as he was plucked away from this region. He was plucked away as, shockingly, he moved across the recorded histories of the very aeonic annals of extremity towards where a part of his hyperversal extremity was currently contained. It was a shocking action as nearby, Zeitgeist felt his aspects of existence receive an enormous shock, blood leaking from his orifices as he staggered back. Far away from this location, in a crack of darkness pulsing with vacuous hyperversal authority, the head of the hyperversal extremity of destruction popped out quizzically as he felt the massive ripples of hyperversal extremity authority spreading out distinctly across different regions of the haven of dissolution. And back in the domain where the adjudicator of dissolution's veiled visage was, her eyes coldly watched while a Tier 1 hyperversal extremity was plucked across the very aeonic annals of extremity to appear before them. His body surrounded by terrifying waves of hyperversal extremity authority that was crushing around him on all sides. His face was ashen as he constantly enlarged and reduced in size, wisps of absolute dynamis of extremity trying to rise and be snuffed out as even without lifting a finger, the massive and much more refined tier of authority the adjudicator of dissolution controlled seemed capable of crushing Kabul entirely. And at such a juncture, "Master!" he bellowed out with a guttural roar as he didn't feel any sense of communication coming from the adjudicator of dissolution. It seemed that she only wanted to crush his hyperversal authority on all sides. There was no reprimand or even a inquiring as to why he did what he did to buy time for his master to come. Things were not flowing how they wanted, nor planned for. The adjudicator of dissolution moved too swiftly, without even inquiring, as if she knew exactly what was happening, with her veiled figure not even batting an eye when she heard Kabul roar out the word "Master." Her gaze only became colder as from afar. From outside the very havens of dissolution, boom. Reality seethed as an interminable force barreled through. It seemed to be swallowing up reality, time, and space itself as it had both arrived and not arrived at this moment. And dominance of heavy insanity and power. The hyperversal extremity authority of devouring. Chapter 25, Rage Against the Dying. Everything was seemingly being swallowed up by an indomitable force as a terrifying aura unveiled itself. This authority being so potent that it even devoured time itself. This could best be seen by what occurred next, as even though this terrifying aura should have been arriving from a vast distance, the maddening aura from afar disappeared as if it was never there, and it instead blared up right beside the visage of hyperversal extremity Kabul, who was getting ground down by the authority of the adjudicator of dissolution. The maddening aura appeared here as if it had been at this location this whole time. Tendrils of black and crimson darkness pulsed out powerfully as they acted like an endless doll wrapped into his being. A devouring darkness was constantly rising from the tip of his feet, all the way to the top of his head, as it seemed to be trying to swallow him alive. One could only see his endlessly stellar pupils against this darkness. His concept that he had taken to extremity was devouring, as he had defined himself. When a concept proceeded so extremely far in the bounds of extremity, it would even be capable of doing what other concepts stood for, and sometimes even better. He held the hyperversal extremity authority of devouring, and yet he could swallow up and alter the orientation of time itself. He could traverse across great distances faster and more proficiently than any spatial concept. And at this moment, the darkness around him rose as his hand reached out towards the struggling figure of Kabul, and this time he devoured the nearby hyperversal extremity as Kabul saw it gradually became able to breathe easier. The environment reality still buzzed and vibrated at the heart auras in this region, as seeing the appearance of a second hyperversal extremity authority, the adjudicator of dissolution, seemed unfazed as she didn't question what he was doing, nor what his purpose was. She knew his purpose very well. She just didn't think such purpose would pull in the visage of an existence who had forged an absolute seed of extremity without even undergoing apexification. Can you all no longer sit still? Her gaze was far-reaching. She did not just see Kabul and the hyperversal extremity of devouring, as she seemed to see other forces standing beside them as well. And the extremity covered with tendrils of time devouring stabilized Kabul as he spoke out with a voice that seemed to be eating away at one's soul. Whatever could the adjudicator of dissolution be talking about? I'm here answering the call of my disciple who was having his very hyperversal authority ground down by the one who should be one of the seven protectors. His words boomed out in this region as sheltered behind the grandeur of the adjudicator of dissolution. Even Noah in the far distance had his eyes become sharp at the pressure this being emanated. Kabul was a hyperversal extremity, as Noah had felt firsthand how overwhelming his pressure was. But this existence currently protecting Kabul, he made even this hyperversal extremity seem like a child. It caused Noah to question just how wide the gaps of power were amongst hyperversal extremities. As for the adjudicator of dissolution, she faced this pressure easily head-on, as she locked her gaze with the hyperversal extremity of devouring. She locked onto his eyes, which were one of the few things revealed by this being. His eyes. She had seen such eyes too many times in her life. Eyes filled with apathy and disregard for her very existence, as they triggered a past memory to appear and disappear within a span of an instant. An instant of a memory to her, but it was akin to her reliving many years in that instant. What are you? Nothing. What are you? Nothing. A massive existence was floating in a darkened space as he gazed down at the obsidian stellar disk of Earth that held a dozen souls. Each time, he floated to a different one and asked questions as his voice leaped with powerful hyperversal extremity authority. All around this region, only an overwhelming darkness could be felt and seen, as those here seemed like everything across existence. The visage of the dark existence pulsing with hyperversal extremity authority moved on to a different figure among the dozen. Svetlana, what determination you amount to? The question was posed to a young woman who seemed to have barely entered adulthood, with a head overflowing with dark hair, her eyes filled with immense darkness and a lack of light. She replied without hesitation, "Nothing." She answered just like all others, but look at me when you reply, girl. Splutch! As his words ended, the left arm of the young woman became utterly shredded and destroyed, everything being turned to mush right up to the shoulder as black gold blood exploded out like a river. Yet no emotion showed itself on the young woman as she turned her head up and gazed into eyes filled with utmost apathy and disregard for her and everything else in life. Those eyes, she gazed at them and replied emotionlessly, "Nothing." She was the last of the 12, as after she finished, the immensely powerful hyperversal extremity moved away and gazed at all of them. "That is right. You are all nothing. You were born with nothing, and your determination die with nothing. Your only purpose is the mission. Continue this mission until the last moments of your life." "Wah!" And a reply came out in unison soon after. "Yes, master." Darkness and coldness were all they could see, and in such an environment, good. The voice of the hyperversal extremity thundered out as his authority leaked out and surged towards all 12 beings below, filling their bodies until they ballooned up to the extent that their souls were about to break. Not many of you determination survive. For those whose wills can overcome, I will ask you to rage. Rage against the dying light. When your spirit feels like it's about to be extinguished, fight. Fight and fight some more. The obsidian tendrils of hyperversal extremity authority around him raged as his covered figure seemed to pulse with immense madness and at the same time clarity. Rage, children. Because if you do not, you may never have the chance to even gaze upon the dying light. Chapter 25-26. Rage against the dying light. 4. A distant memory. It came and left just as quickly as not even an instant passed, the adjudicator of dissolution gazing at the eyes that pulled this memory forward as she spoke coldly. Kabul has violated the investiture of extremity by attacking an existence yet to even undergo a pexification. For such a blatant action by someone of his stature, his hyperversal extremity authority shall be stripped by half. For his blatant violation of the investiture of extremity, Kabul would be stripped of half of his hyperversal extremity authority. It was a shocking punishment that was meant to serve more as a message than anything else. As with it, beings would be told that they shouldn't just expedition or Crimson Haven albatrosses to bear the weight of if they violate the investiture of extremity. But the tendrils of devouring around a certain being vibrated as he shook his head. No, taking half the authority of a hyperversal extremity for merely gazing upon the recorded history of a lower life form is an unreasonable price. He spoke with the same dominance and surety as the adjudicator of dissolution, as if they were equals. And yet the veiled figure of dissolution turned her head as her fair hand rose up. "You seem to be under the misconception that I was asking for permission. No, my punishment is already done." Her words were utterly cold as her fair hand that had risen came down, and with it, "Ah!" Behind the figure of the hyperversal extremity of devouring, Kabul cried out as even under the protection of his master, he found that a great chunk of his authority and power was fading away. This was an unfathomable situation as the profound and powerful hyperversal authority of devouring was all around him, and the authority of the adjudicator of dissolution shouldn't have been able to reach him. And yet, erasing the recorded history of a weak-willed hyperversal extremity who would go as far as to blatantly attack lower life forms is an easy thing to do. Let this serve as a warning to any others alongside him. Erasing their records in the event of any violations will be just as easy. Her voice felt chilling as Kabul's soul shuddered. She had erased so much of his recorded history to the extent that half of his hyperversal extremity authority was taken away. His soul felt the changes that were so profound that it shouldn't be possible for any common hyperversal extremity to even dream of it. And yet, he found to his horror that he couldn't find any knowledge or records of two of his absolute dynamis of extremity. Not just that, he had lost any knowledge of a few dozen of his boundaries. With the second boundary, he should have attained extremity in after devouring, also being nowhere in sight. No, his soul felt blank, as if it had forgotten utterly crucial things that should have never left. He couldn't help but feel a sense of profound fear when he gazed towards the veiled adjudicator of dissolution as her power. It was actually so terrifying that it could go as far as erase the recorded history that even included a boundary that had reached extremity. His recorded history that shouldn't even be accessible by any in the aeonic annals of extremity? Just, who was she? In his fear, he floated ever closer behind the hyperversal extremity of devouring, as he felt his master gaze towards the adjudicator of dissolution, coldly. Letting it serve as a warning. What a curious thing for you to say, adjudicator. His voice was deep as he gazed towards the surroundings, seemingly seeing through all veils and gazing at all of dissolution, as his eyes even came to lock with Noah's visage. Do you know what is even more curious, though? Most adjudicators quietly observe their jobs and duties. Yet in the span of days, he's had multiple interventions publicly spread all around. Apex aeonic life forms killing lower life forms, hundreds of scions perishing under their watch, an apex war balloon, and now even a clash against hyperversal extremities. It really brings to question your judgment and position. Hung! The shocking words caused even Noah's eyes to turn sharp as he felt the dense hyperversal extremity authority of devouring blade, the very reality itself being devoured as the figure of the extremity. The shocking words, the veiled visage of the adjudicator of dissolution, actually laughed sonorously as one could feel immense coldness, the voice booming out on all sides. How kind of you to worry about my position. When you are able to stand before my presence for longer than a few seconds before scurrying away, maybe then I'll take your worries as fair. Words that utterly decimated the grandeur of the hyperversal extremity of devouring echoed out. In the far distance, a hidden figure of Apuch's master, the hyperversal extremity of destruction. His visage drew a sharp breath as he was once more reminded how unfathomable the adjudicator of dissolution was. Without trading any more words, the brilliant aura of devouring fully disappeared, along with the being that came with it. A massive void being left in space that the adjudicator of dissolution waved her hands to erase. The surroundings then became veiled and distorted as she stared towards a far pocket of space where the aura of destruction silently disappeared. Her gaze then coming to land on Noah as she asked vaguely, "Why are dredges of devouring looking at you?" Even though she knew that part of this was due to her position, there also seemed to be more in play as when she focused on Noah, he only shook his head while gazing towards the twisting landscape around him. They seem to want one of my people who has an innate, elusive, hyperversal foundation. Wah. He spoke freely as the veiled eyes of the hyperversal extremity pulsed. He held in being with such a foundation, even though it wasn't as pristine as a being like him who had forged an absolute dynamis of extremity. It still meant that it was an existence that was reasonably guaranteed to achieve extremity in time, as she would be sought after by any inheritance, or even the 7 clans. This being before her also seemed to become more and more unfathomable. But she had no idea that among Noah's people, there were multiple who were at the cusp of attaining an absolute dynamis of extremity, as there were dozens of extremity foundations just waiting for a missing spark to be the same. When all of it was revealed in the upcoming Apex War, along with a massive number of Apex Aeonic life forms that would make one think they stemmed from a powerful inheritance of extremity, the reasoning and understanding of reality would be warped for many. Chapter 25-27, The Dumbrative View. Innumerable paths litter the Aeonic annals of extremity as unrecorded histories become recorded histories constantly. Truly powerful beings are capable of peering into the Aeonic annals of extremity, gazing at not just that which has been recorded, but that which still remains unrecorded. This capability allows you to view unrecorded and recorded history pertinent to the past. The gazing of such history, allowing you to more seamlessly select which path to follow. When it comes to events deemed crucial by these events, this ability will activate passively to show you an unrecorded history across the 25% of its value. Active utilization of the ability costs the same as you can view a random number of recorded and unrecorded history. cost of soul value is varying when it comes to other targets. The details of another characteristic of the dynamic extremity that allowed Noah to hide his important history in the Aeonic Canvas field before him. He was also digesting the events where he witnessed multiple hyperversal extremities, clashing in Haden's dissolution, as he was reminded of how many layers of mystery he needed more information. He needed to be cognizant of what was occurring around him, and even what would occur in the future if he was to be able to dominate and continue his path. The oraculum dynamis of extremity provided for this need. Inside the golden mystic domain, the gazes of many were obscured. The valiant cries of O'Leary were heard, while Noah performed dual cultivation against 81 boundaries in the 11th layer, in addition to forming yet another absolute seed of extremity. He silently cast and waited. It's easy to. Golden light overflowed from him. His eyes showed astounding brilliance, as if trillions of golden singularities were being. Then, part of his soul became bathed entirely in the authority of the oraculum dynamis of extremity, as it sank into a vast and endless locale that could truly only be reached and impaired by the powerful. And even by the truly powerful, they could only gaze upon what was already written on the world. Very few could observe what had yet to be recorded. Noah's vision saw the budding of countless bubbles of light before him as he passed through every single one, all of them becoming mere points of light, as for the first round, he thought of anything relevant to himself. The countless glimmers of light pulsed and transformed before his eyes as soon after, all that his vision saw was a dazzling golden book. Its covers were rough and ancient, as if it had seen the vicissitudes of time, and yet its pages were clear gold as they were ready to accept eons of history. The golden pages unfurled until they arrived at a specific blank page, words shimmering with the authority of the oraculum dynamis of extremity beginning to be written, as alongside this, a fantastical scene bloomed before Noah's eyes. The surroundings were murky and filled with an overabundance of sources of chaos. Rivers of blood flowed as deathly authorities ran rampant, a thick taste of death and destruction overwhelming any weak being, as Commander Vladik looked at all of this with a blank expression. He stood above the bodies of his lifeless brethren, that formed into mountains below his feet, and yet a verdant obsidian authority curled in endlessly like a smoke as he saw the bodies of his people rise, their musculature spasming as from them, deathly skeletal atrocities that seemed to have at the very minimum one apex aeonic soul values rose. At the very minimum. It mattered not whether they were bodies of apex aeonic life forms or reverend emperors. When they rose from death, they pulsed with a horror of at least one apex aeonic soul value. They were only one of the reasons for him being where he was right now, as in the distance, the cackling of a lich reveling in death could be heard. Dense clouds of verdant obsidian light covered everything else in the surroundings, as he couldn't discern how everyone else was faring. But did he really need to wonder? Was it not all just pure death? Was what this fiend before him brought really anything but death? His blank eyes rose to find the visage of an existence billowing with verdant obsidian authority across his body, and yet his eyes shone with golden radiance as the pressure he emanated felt like it was crushing Vladik's soul even from afar, the enemy commander that Osmont brought forth as his backing. His name had been ringing out as chants from the countless legions of atrocities rising in his wake. As Vladik gazed towards his coming figure, he found his lips moving out of the control of his will as he spoke in a raspy voice. "You think they will let you do all this without repercussions? To desecrate my lineage and the very life forms of inheritances? You squelch!" With a beckoning of his hand, a deathly verdant black bone spear stabbed out and impaled the figure of Vladik, thousands of damage values erupting out in a contained fashion so as to not destroy him right away, while the voice of the human before him. "Relish this death. Why? Because from it you will rise to become even stronger. This shall be your atonement and gift for making today's reality occur." His voice caused Vladik's soul to feel so extremely cold as he felt poisonous tendrils sinking into his aspects of existence, into his very records, and begin altering them. Horrid fear rose in his heart at this as he thought of Uriel. As he thought of how he got here, he stared at the fiend. No, you are no fiend. ZT! The last vestiges of his life left him as even in his fear he managed to cry out in his raspy voice. Demon. You are a demon. Chapter 25-28, the curtains draw close. 1. You are a demon that Elder Apuch will destroy with surety, a demon that no inheritance will leave alive. You go! Vladik's will and soul were utterly torn, as even his raspy voice couldn't be heard, and from his visage, impaled by bones, a verdant black smoke bloomed and covered everything about him, as a blazing authority of death began to rise from it. The first page closed, as the dazzling scenes Noah saw faded, the massive golden book before him beginning to flip towards another page. His manifested will smiled while gazing at the ancient book before him, as he felt like a privileged reader who was gazing upon a history that had yet to even occur. A demon, huh? He thought of the words Commander Vladik was saying before he was undoubtedly liberated by his doing as Alexander King. He thought of the shocking descriptions of lifeless bodies rising again to have, at the very minimum, one apex aeonic value. It seemed the absolute seed of extremity he was forming currently was not something to be scoffed at, as its capabilities were something to utterly dread. He wasn't able to tell of the whole situation of the apex war of annihilation from the one unrecorded history, but he could affirm that the commander of the noblesse lineage would die even before the war was over, as there was one name for him to pay attention to. Apuch. Even with the dreadful power Alexander King showed, Vladik still spoke with his fear that such a being could stop him. Before Noah could ponder even more, the book before him had opened to another golden page as radiant halcyon runic words began to be etched. The ability of a dumbrated viewpoint would show a random number of histories with every cast as Noah would attain an unknown amount of information each time. And at the second unrecorded history seemed to be especially radiant as another scene loomed before him. Venus and vessel-like structures could be seen snaking out for light years. The figures of a group of scions passing across the top of such structures as their voices could be heard in the distance. The word is that fewer and fewer golden and obsidian extremity panaceas can be found. It's astounding when most of us were able to attain at least a golden extremity panaceas, a number far exceeding what was recorded in previous initiation steps of extremity sanctification. Their robes held a dazzling pink plum petal to signify their inheritance as they moved further away, their voices still resonant. It also means the last extremity panacea should soon be appearing. Another crimson extremity panacea. Their voices held fervor as they moved away, not noticing that below them, amidst the intersecting Venus structures extending in the distance, there was a calm aura that floated above a pool of obsidian liquid that held a thin, dried-out stalk at its very center. No signs of life or even the powerful leviathans of dissolution were present, as this being held a shining horn on her forehead, her hair filled with streaks of crimson, and now even more golden streaks of light as the temperature around her constantly fluctuated. It was Ayame of infinite extremity. While others guessed and moved haphazardly, she came to this location after much deliberation. Her exceedingly beautiful face carried traces of hesitation as she waved her hands to show a few twirling golden and obsidian extremity panaceas, but her gaze remained on the area ahead as she waited. She was unlike the others. She could peer into the Ionic annals of extremity, as while others wondered when the last extremity panacea would come, she had arrived at where it should bloom. She had glimpsed at something that had yet to even be recorded. It cost her a lot to do this before undergoing apexification, as the only way she even had a chance of doing so was due to nothing other than her origins. Infinite extremity. There were many inheritances in the 7 clans out there, each had their own grandiose names. Infinite extremity, they were not simply a grandiose name. They lived up to it. Oh? The second scene Noah was shown held fantastical implications for Ayame that Noah had first come across during the scuffle with the scions of the Genesis Institute of Extremity. Infinite extremity. He was given a glimpse that some factions held deep history and power, that he needed to carefully observe and understand. And just as the unrecorded history involving Ayame disappeared, the pages fluttered as another began. It was all still under a single cast, as all of it only showed the beginnings of Noah deeply understanding how reality would unfold in the coming future, where he would be able to understand his enemies in a way even they didn't understand themselves. And just like this, time flowed, within the Aeonic haven of Penumbra. Unlike dissolution, Penumbra shared a trait with other havens that had already undergone extremity sanctification as it was exceedingly vast, with its explored lands under the dominance of many different factions. The cult of endless shadows had their hegemony centralized in a small segment within the southern region of Penumbra, and yet even this small segment had a wondrous array of planes of existence, stretched out artificially in its own preset planar system. Noah had only now begun to near it while following hyperversal extremity Gabriella and Grand Primeval Elder Silas in tow, as the blinding shadowy lights in the distance began to reveal more of this world of tantalizing darkness and shadows. At such a time, the vibrant visage of the hyperversal extremity in front of them turned around while speaking calmly. Your soul was tense this whole time until just moments ago. Whatever could have happened to cause your reservations against a hyperversal extremity to lessen even further? Hyperversal extremity? Gabriella asked with a smile as she found Noah's demeanor completely unique. Silas retained a respectful expression prior to this being, while having already sent Noah multiple messages to show the utmost respect towards her. Her standing being something not many in the whole of the cult of endless shadows could match. Yet Noah freely gazed back at her while his will took in the grandness prior to him, his words ringing out resonantly. What happened? A body of mine just watched a hyperversal extremity have half of their recorded history erased from existence. It made me comprehend even the esteemed hyperversal extremities aren't all that in the face of true power. News hadn't yet fully spread, as with the threat from the hyperversal extremity of devouring. They were bound to. The upper echelons of the cult of endless shadows would be among the first to hear of the stunning event that had just occurred in the haven of dissolution. Elder Silas turning ashen at Noah's words and about to turn towards hyperversal extremity. Gabriella, to apologize, when this existence actually laughed, while her deep eyes locked onto Noah with even more scrutiny. You're truly living up to your name when you act like this, and you're making my anticipations all that much higher for you. Very well, enter our cult of endless shadows, and let us see more of you. We shall also deliberate in the shadows, or if you are even qualified to begin with. A long expanse of shadows were cast behind her. With her words, it seemed like the gates into the cult of endless shadows truly opened. Chapter 25-29, the curtains draw close. 2. His authority gave the illusion of the vast and the sea. But he knew it was just that, an illusion. Within this illusion, he could see the scenes where stood on dark skies with the hyperversal extremity Gabriella and Elder Silas. He could see his reified sources of extremity moving across the vibrant and unique space within the extremity veins of dissolution, as they grabbed anything, even shimmering, with the essence of an aeonic treasure of extremity. He could see his figure standing before the adjudicator of dissolution, and his many bodies standing before many different existences. He could see it all within this vastness that was himself, as after a while, thump! The beat of his heart reverberated out and took him out of this illusion. And instead he stepped into the very real reality, as he felt this vast authority in the form of multiple boundaries. Quintessential hyperversal man proliferated all around, brought together the vibrant summoning confused death, pride, gluttony, sloth, envy, lust, wrath, every breath. A deeply cerulean mana was telling him that it was time. His portion of the soul that was taking on the identity of Alexander tuned out everything else momentarily. The task at hand, as after activating and seeing the grandness of the next absolute seed of extremity that he could make. Noah sought to even go above this as he expanded the base boundaries he was mixing. Manadynamics joined the fray to give this new boundary the quality of endlessness. With this quality in place, he then pulled in Niflheim and entropy. His quintessential breath of extremity modus operandi buzzed as it supported it all. The number of boundaries Noah was trying to fuse in this new dynamis of extremity already exceeding what the previous dynamis held during their formation. He wanted to add even more, but of course they had to have a semblance of compatibility. Otherwise, even with his quintessential breath of extremity modus operandi, it would all fall apart. He felt the many strands of authority cycling in line through him as he carefully added ether and conquest. Thump! His heartbeat resonantly again as his whole soul now felt a strain. Yet his will was still bright as in the midst of concepts like necromancy and death, add in the concept of life, prana, and the soul. A verdant life flourished as both the boundaries of life and prana began to fray, initially followed by the concept of the soul. Since he had foreseen the very recorded history of being like Commander Vladik be changed upon their death by the effects of this new dynamis, the inclusion of the soul in another unimaginable brilliance. But the cycling authorities turned unstable, as they seemed to say it was one too many, and even possibly not aligned in their definition. But the tyrannical will of the soul doing all this couldn't allow such a thing as to complete everything. The radiant multicolored light of quintessence shone. It cascaded down and dominantly suppressed all others under its light, telling every single one to behave. And an unfathomable resonance is occurring in an extremely large number of concepts. An absolute seed of extremity unlike any other has begun to be forged. Manadynamics, necromancy, summoning, Thulu, apocalypse, death, pride, gluttony, sloth, envy, greed, lust, wrath, Niflheim, entropy, ether, prana, life, conquest, soul, quintessence, 21 concepts. 21. Noah was only attempting such a drastic thing due to the expanded breadth that his soul of Alexander King now held as an apex aeonic life form. Thump! The beat of his heart was resonant as another full cycle was completed. There was no disharmony. Quintessence forcefully corrected any discrepancies there were between the many concepts and brought together a product of utmost majesty. And the result was a glorious one. A tear of a dynamis of extremity belonging only to you has come to fruition. A quintessential absolute seed of extremity has been born. Shing! His body of Alexander King shone with brilliance. The visage of Aurelia that was connected to him in this misty domain. No way. Aurelia set out with hazy eyes as she felt the convergence of an abstruse absolute seed of extremity she had been feeling this whole time in her soul. She felt it all meld together under the grandiose light of the seed being born within Alexander King. As if it was a shame that it couldn't be merged this whole time, and something even grander than it was just converged in the body of the being who held the sources of the very concepts Aurelia was trying to converge. So ridiculously, two absolute seeds of extremity formed simultaneously within the infinite hyperversal Haven at this junction. One within Katerina Aurelia Dismukes, and the other was within an elevated portion of Noah's soul, as what he forged was a distinctive type of an absolute seed of extremity. A quintessential absolute seed of extremity. His soul burned gloriously with 4 perennial Yggdrasil of extremity already, and yet a mere forming quintessential absolute seed of extremity caused their countless branches to shake and flourish with even more brilliance. The quintessential absolute dynamis of extremity has named itself. The Thanatos quintessential absolute dynamis of extremity has formed under unimaginably distinctive conditions, the resonance of concepts within it, and its standing placing its rate of convergence at 50%. It didn't even wait to be named. It named itself in a grand show of power as it named itself Thanatos, a word that was steeped in death. A word that was actually reminiscent to a river in the old Niflheim dimension where grand battles were fought before. Such a word forged into a blinding runic seed in Noah's soul, as even while it was 50% of the way converged, the grandeur it released seemed to be competing with the auras of the perennial Yggdrasils of extremity within his soul. Chapter 25:30. The curtains draw close. A 30. Along with a ridiculous 50% convergence right at its founding, the Thanatos quintessential absolute dynamis of extremity domineeringly took up space within Noah's soul as a verdant obsidian deathly light spread out. The features of quintessential undead rise, quintessential Thanatos embodiment, and Chthonian sinners of Thanatos have been born. Three dazzling features bloomed as Noah's visions of what he saw in a dumbrated viewpoint were coming closer to fruition and even being exceeded. However potent this feature used to be, it was now something else entirely after the changes Noah made for the forging of the quintessential absolute Thanatos dynamis of extremity. And this showed itself clearly with just the first feature. Death is not the end. The authority of Thanatos burns strong as it allows you to gaze upon the masses, and from among those who have perished, you can cause the rise of something even grander in their stead. This ability is both an active and a passive one that requires 5% of your maximum quintessential hyperversal soul values to express the passive and active effects every minute. Quintessential Undead Rise utilizes the authority of the Thanatos quintessential absolute dynamis of extremity to rewrite the recorded histories of all affected perished existences, transforming them into quintessential undead Thanatos vassals who live only for the glory of the authority of Thanatos. Each quintessential undead Thanatos vassal will undergo such a drastic change in their recorded history, as while the new form they will take is random, each one will have at a minimum 10 apex Thanatos soul values, no matter which type of life form they originally spawned from. When quintessential undead rise is triggered against perished existences who have more than 10 apex Thanatos soul values, it will transform their recorded histories to grant them their original parameter values, and then further enhance them by 100%. All of the Thanatos vassals will become bound to your soul and follow your will, as they will continue to endlessly spawn from perished existences until a certain threshold is reached. This threshold is based on the level of power that the boundaries supporting Thanatos have currently reached. Legions of quintessential undead Thanatos vassals will form across the land, as when the authority of death and chaos is potent enough, even more potent, vassals will rise until the grandeur of Thanatos is spread across the vicissitudes of reality. A dreadful offensive ability of horrendous proportions came, an ability that granted Noah legions of quintessential undead Thanatos vassals as the maximum number was still not known, and it could only be determined by the power of the 21 boundaries that Thanatos was forged from. The most ridiculous thing was that no matter what corpse Noah triggered quintessential undead rise from, a terror with a minimum of 10 apex Thanatos soul values would be born. An apex aeonic life form born on any corpse Noah gazed upon and extended this dreadful authority. It was so balance-breaking that the only semblance of any balance stemmed from the fact that this ability required corpses. It required perished existences to rewrite the recorded histories, as if Noah could simply summon them freely. The scales would be even more destroyed. When he utilized it on dead apex aeonic life forms who exceeded 10 apex aeonic soul values, they would rise into random, quintessential undead Thanatos vassals that retained their original power, and then received a 100% boost all around for it, as Noah truly didn't have any words for this terrible feature. And it would cost him nothing to retain all of these Thanatos vassals, as when they continued to be forged in the upcoming battles, legions of such terrors would be following behind the shadow of Alexander King. At this moment, the words of Commander Vladik in the vision showed from the adumbrated viewpoint crossed Noah's mind as he smiled. He could now understand why this noblesse had called him a demon. But no matter what distinction he was given, after the changes he had made, things were bound to get even more ecstatic. Unbelievable, Aurelia uttered out in a daze as she felt the budding seed in her soul. Was it truly an absolute seed of extremity? Something like that had actually bloomed in her soul? It was so surreal that she felt golden tears inadvertently form on the rims of her eyes, tears that were then outshone by the golden words that appeared before her eyes. An unnamed absolute dynamis of extremity has been born. The words affirmed her current reality as she felt the brilliant seed in her soul, a seed that seemed to be asking her to name it. Fortune and grandeur overflowed in her aspects of existence as she calmed down. She then called out lightly, "Thesaurus." The Thesaurus' absolute dynamis of extremity has formed under unprecedented circumstances, the resonance of concepts within it placing its rate of convergence at 20 cent. Thesaurus, a word that was closely related to a treasury or location where profound riches and treasures were collected and laid out. This was the first absolute dynamis of extremity that the true Emperor of Fortune forged under the guidance of the true Emperor of Quintessence. It was also the second existence within the infinite hyperversal haven to achieve such a feat. It showed the rapid pace of progression of a power that was relatively unknown at this point in time in the aeonic havens of extremity. It showed that the grandeur the true Emperor of Quintessence held was something that could also be expressed by those around him. When the infinite hyperversal haven fully unveiled itself and all of its wonders in the future to come, just how would the myriad of inheritances and clans compare? Named Dr. Hall, Aeonic Vital Haven, Lineage Human. Titles: the Doctor, Master of Medicine, Big Pharma, 200. Vital Defense Soul Value, 200. Dynamis of Extremity, none. Boundaries of Extreme Medicine, Prana, Life, Antediluvian, Genesis, Manodynamics, Biochemistry, Epidemiology, Essensology, Pharmacology. Chapter 2531. The curtains draw close. Before, in a blinding stellar region filled with churning liquefied essence of dissolution, distorting space constantly. This essence felt vile and majestic at the same time as any being with weak aspects of existence nearing. It could be corroded in a short period of time, and rivers of this essence seemed to be extending from all directions like endless branches, joining together into a vast sea, a sea that formed an interminable wall before the eyes of all beings who had managed to make it this far, as it had no end in sight. The wall seemed liquid and solid at the same time, as it was akin to countless branches intersecting together, as if it was the junction between an outer layer of the vein of dissolution and an inner layer. Within the veins of existences, they were composed of the tunica adventitia, which was the outer layer, the tunica media, which was the middle layer, and the tunica intima, which was the innermost layer, lined up by smooth endothelial cells. This region seemed akin to the junction from the outer and into the middle layer. In between the surging, conjoining rivers and branches of dissolution, obsidian extremity panaceas could be seen floating serenely, as they dared any beings brave enough to attain them, with massive leviathans of dissolution nearing one apex eonic soul values roaring out in this region, as powerful scions like Erickson, Atlas of the Plum Sword of Extremity, and Lodovico, among others, could be seen. Their bodies released blinding radiance and power as they had forged their extremity foundations, beings like Atlas having even attained a dynamis of extremity, as the power they released was enough to rival leviathans of dissolution, who were almost nearing a singular apex aeonic value. They still fought as apart from obsidian extremity panaceas. There were also blinding singularities of aeonic treasures of extremity that were either precious loot that allowed one to traverse towards the 10th boundary layer with ease, aid in forging a dynamis of extremity, or panaceas that were useful in reinforcing one's foundation. They fought tooth and nail, as all of them felt the urgency that others had begun to openly mention the last few hours, that the initiation step of extremity sanctification was close to an end, that the extremity panaceas were becoming rarer to find unless one came in this region where a massive wall of a sea of dissolution stopped the advancement of any beings forward. The reason for this could all be attributed to a single being. Boom! While others were struggling or grouping up against the leviathans of dissolution, nearing the power of apex aeonic life forms, any single one that he came across was bullied into oblivion, as the visage of the quintessential Emperor of Extremity had just ripped apart 5 leviathans of dissolution who were guarding a group of loot-filled singularities right before the endless wall of dissolution. The one to bring everything to an early end was none other than the true Emperor of Quintessence, as he had his reified sources of extremity sweep away all obstacles easily, while obtaining an overabundance of loot himself. It was to the extent that apart from the loot stemming from the two apex aeonic life forms he had killed, aeonic treasures of extremity that were conducive to elevating boundaries, forming dynamis of extremity, and the accelerated convergence of dynamis of extremity were within his hands in abundance. Each of them held a myriad of names, like the blazing hyphae of extremity, glacial perennial heartwig, radiant moongrass, singularity-torn bud, and many more. When categorizing them, Noah was able to quantify 233 aeonic treasures of extremity geared towards helping the progression of boundaries up to the 13th boundary layer. Many others sharing this quality, like the blazing hyphae of extremity. Lastly, he had scoured and attained 174 aeonic treasures of extremity geared towards increasing the rate of convergence of already formed dynamis of extremity. It was a heavy haul for a single being, and this wasn't counting the extremity panaceas he collected for the shadowlings of the cult of endless shadows and others he kept for his own collection. All in all, he had dominated the scions that had risen up in this stage of the initiation step of extremity sanctification, and he now stood before a huge demarcation of a barrier that seemed to be something only apex aeonic life forms could cross. His eyes were full of calm, as he had utilized the feature of a Dumbarton viewpoint greatly these past moments with the might of Alexander, finding out many more things in the unfolding future as he understood that this wall would only begin to buzz and initiate a profound new process when the last set of crimson extremity panaceas were plucked. Yes, a set! He had seen this with his own will, as his body in this intersection of a space filled with dissolution turned away and gazed towards an entirely different direction. The hidden space far away from here when the set of crimson extremity panaceas would bloom, and where the visage of Ayame of infinite extremity was hidden. The horn on her forehead shone with a crimson gold glint at this moment, as she seemed like a priestess of flames and honor. Her figure hidden from others, as the region she was in had been enacted with veils that masked the very records of this area. If others were to look, even scions like Lodovico may be fooled into seeing an altered record than was currently happening. Because as fewer and fewer extremity panaceas remained, with tens of thousands of scions struggling for even a smidgen of an edge in order to stand out on the stage of apex aeonic life forms about to unfold, a heavy aura and a blinding crimson light had begun to flare from this region. It was a light that would normally tell others and cause them to rush here to fight for one of the ultimate opportunities. But Ayame's fearsome means contained it all as she gazed towards a blooming singularity with great expectations. That is until... whap! Her eyes flashed as her gaze changed, turning towards her left side as she saw the altered recorded she had set up be twisted as an existence calmly stepped in. An air of majesty emanated from him, as he was none other than the reified source of dreams. The dreamer of extremity, carrying Noah's devilishly handsome visage and adorned in sandy gold robes, appeared at this position that nobody else should have been able to discern. Chapter 25:32. The curtains draw close. 5. He came. Ayame turned to focus on the visage of Noah's dreamer of extremity as she spoke calmly, but one could still see a sense of veiled surprise. Noah gazed at the center of the blooming singularity as it bloomed at the end of one stage and the start of another, as he asked with a smile, "Were you actually expecting me?" I was expecting that if there was anyone who might exceed all my expectations and appear at such a critical juncture, it had to be you. Her eyes shone with profound brilliance as her will delved into the atomic canon of extremity. She looked at Noah and then turned to look at the crimson light that was blooming with even more intensity than the first panacea, as she seemingly came to a decision, her voice ringing out clearly. There are many theories I have of you. During the first experience, I delved into science, and then watching you move against all others in the past days, it has made me realize that you and I are moving in the same path. Oh! Noah held a smile on his face as with his hands behind his back, he floated towards the area where the crimson green light was concentrated. Ayame didn't stop when she nodded. Yes, you are also seeking to complete an aspect of infinity, are you not? An aspect of infinity. If it were to pass him, he would have been surprised and given Ayame even more clues if he heard more of her shocking words out. But the current Noah was a vastly different being compared to you now. You think that I am trying to forge the infinity of essence, while you yourself chase the infinity of beauty. You wish to promise me information and secrets of your inheritance of infinite extremity to help me achieve what I seek. His words were akin to a clap of thunder that gave me shock and it was because she couldn't believe the words that had come out of Noah's mouth, since their implications were too grand. For him to speak about the things she was planning on saying, you couldn't have possibly been able to discern all this through future records. That is only something that hyperversal extremities are capable of. Have you thought that? A capability that a being like him should not have, as it was the only way for him to state what he stated. Noah smiled as he didn't confirm or deny any of her words. Something only hyperversal extremities could do. Of course, they could only do such a thing with their means of forming powerful, absolute dynamis of extremity. And Noah was already doing that in abundance now. But the subject matter was infinity. The inheritance that was infinite extremity was a grand one, as those within it sought different aspects of infinity, such beings always showing terrifying power. For the initiation step of extremity sanctification, they had only sent forward Ayame, as without Noah's participation, she would be one of those who attained the strongest boon here without the help of any others. This was the behemoth that was the infinite extremity, their hyperversal extremities being forces that even those from the 7 clans were wary of. Do you know how many beings have successfully expanded the concept of infinity itself into extremity? Noah retained his smile as he asked a question that Ayame would have asked him if this conversion was going according to her plans. And she knew this answer as she became even more certain of her thoughts while replying. None! Wah! None, recorded in history anyways. None! Nobody had been capable of expanding and taking the concept of infinity towards extremity, as it was simply too grand, too unachievable. But would this be the same case for Noah? His body began to blare with a cerulean brilliance, as from the soul of Alexander King in the infinite hyperversal haven, the concept of infinity was roused and began its venture towards extremity. Once expanded, quintessence would do its job and seamlessly take it towards the 9th boundary layer, as in no time, his main body and reified sources of extremity were able to express it, a concept others could not take to extremity. Noah embarked on its tumultuous path today, as his visage began to burn brightly with it while speaking towards Ayame. No need for you to appeal to my better nature or promise to aid in my search for infinity. You can have one of the crimson extremity panaceas that is about to bloom, in exchange for you taking me to the heart of your infinite extremity. From there, I would like to attain any single opportunity of my choosing. One of the panaceas about to bloom. Ayame heard this and connected the dots, as she didn't need to take long to nod her head. Of course, and while we are in the depths of infinite extremity, you may even find yourself unwilling to leave. Entry into a grand inheritance and taking an opportunity for himself from it. Noah was already doing this with the Cult of Endless Shadows, as he was now adding an even more powerful inheritance on top of it, all for the cost of an extremity panacea he no longer had any use for. Hung! Behind him, the crimson radiance overflowed as the blossoming singularity gushed out a small, surging sea of essence, all of this contained by Ayame's altered record of the surroundings. Noah's focus came upon the blooming light, as the grandeur of incandescent crystalline crimson extremity panaceas could be seen. A set. 2 dazzling panaceas shone with radiance, as unlike other steps on extremity sanctification, deviations in how things normally went could slowly be seen within the extremity sanctification of dissolution. The plucking of these extremity panaceas here would effectively start the process of bringing to a close the initiation step of extremity sanctification, where many powerful reverend scions reigned, tens of thousands of them having fought tooth and nail, as less than half of them were able to achieve golden, obsidian, or crimson extremity panaceas. Others only gained aeonic treasures of extremity geared towards helping their boundaries or dynamis of extremity. But those with extremity foundations set in place due to the initiation step, they would be exploding with power and joining the expanded majesty of the culmination step of extremity sanctification, as all of this was going towards aiding them in a more rapid progression of extremity than normal. They didn't need to cultivate for thousands or millions of years as from the treasures they obtained here. They could make the same advancement as others who had spent a great deal of time traversing towards extremity. This was why it was called extremity sanctification. And this was the reason why the culmination step that held profound boons for apex aeonic life forms was going to be the main concentrate for all inheritances wishing to rapidly elevate the power of their forces. Noah knew all of this would begin to play out as soon as he made a move towards the dazzling panaceas before him, and he did not hesitate. S.A. His hands steeped in sandy gold light grabbed the anchored crimson extremity panaceas before him, feeling their pulses in his hands as the moment he did so. Psst. The surrounding space began to shake. Not just this region, but the whole vastness within the extremity vein of dissolution was beginning to shake and vibrate with authority. Having ushered forth this step freely, Noah threw one of the dazzling crimson extremity panaceas towards Ayame, while another disappeared towards his expansive space. The sonorous voice of Ayame ringing out as she accepted it blazed with a fiery light, beginning to absorb its essence right away to establish her extremity foundation. You have paved the way forward, hastened the arrival and proliferation of apex aeonic life forms and a myriad of factions across the sector. Will you be able to keep your dominance against monsters stuck in the 16th and 17th boundary layers where the only thing in their minds is extremity? Was he ready for apex aeonic life forms? The current scions like Ayame would use their extremity foundations to break through and then assimilate the treasures they attained to quickly stabilize their power as apex aeonic life forms, with those who had backings of the majestic clans or potent inheritances being fed even more resources to propel their strength upwards, as they would become renowned apex aeonic life forms as the culmination step was underway. When it came to Noah, who didn't have the backing of any inheritance, will I keep my dominance from here on out? Haha! His tyrannical will vibrated with radiance, as this was a question that didn't even need answering. Chapter 25:33, The Extremity Vein Rises. 1. The culmination step, which held unknown wonders and boons, was one that received the most attention in any extremity sanctification. Even the extremity step, where only hyperversal extremities could truly reign, did not receive as much attention, and this had its own profound reasons that many would come to find out in the future to unfold. The culmination step was so favored because of many points, but one of the more common ones was the fact that aeonic treasures of extremity that could aid with boundaries past the 13th boundary layer appeared. During this time of the initiation step, Noah had only ever gathered loot similar to the blazing hyphae of extremity that aided one up to the 13th boundary layer. The culmination stage was one that forged a generation of powerful apex aeonic life forms and future hyperversal extremities, as dynamis would be more easily converged here, and the hope of forming an absolute dynamis of extremity was actually a recorded history that had come to be in the previous extremity sanctification. It was a crucial stage, and Noah had ushered it forth as when the space around them began to tremble, deeply black light began to cluster above Noah's vision as a pure source of dissolution. Dissolution seemed to be drawn from all around and converging here. This dense authority snaking towards Noah's dreamer of extremity and sinking into his body as it tried to sear itself into his soul. Ayame watched quietly as she knew what was happening. For the being to have attained any astonishing recorded feats in the initiation step of extremity sanctification, they would be branded with a profound authority to aid them in future steps of extremity sanctification. For the being to obtain the first extremity panacea, for the being to kill the most leviathans of dissolution, for the being to attain the most aeonic treasures of extremity, for the being that obtained the last extremity panacea. Normally, all of these feats would be spread out across multiple different beings. But as Ayame gazed towards Noah, she knew that he may just pull in all of these achievements for himself and attain an even grander threshold for the future to come. the authority of an aeonic haven of extremity. It was something that any prominently powerful being with grand aspirations would seek to take for themselves, or at the very least, expand what such a haven stood for as a concept. But many would come to realize over the years that passed that either their expanded concepts would veer ever further away from what the haven stood for, and that nobody could ever truly reach extremity in what the concept of the haven signified. Many in the Aeonic Haven of Genesis expanded the concept of Genesis, with unique existences like Orion and Noah also expanding their version of Genesis, as none of them truly had a link to what the Aeonic Haven of Genesis stood for. One would know they weren't on the proper path of Genesis or any other concepts of an Aeonic Haven. They expanded when in their boundary layers. Nothing relating to this haven itself would be found. Noah and Orion's concepts of Genesis had no link to the Aeonic Haven of Genesis, as they did not correlate with the authority of this haven. But if a being was accomplished enough and was able to enact one recorded history after another within a haven, they may just accumulate enough understanding and access to the extent that they would be able to truly step on an endless path of the authority of a genuine Aeonic Haven of extremity. On this day, Noah Osmont was receiving pure streams of dissolution as they were forming a brand into his soul, a brand that read with brilliant obsidian grandeur, "The beginnings of dissolution," one of the 7 Aeonic vaults of extremity, the havens of extremity. There were the vaults of Genesis, Helios, and Penumbra. There were also vaults of Andromeda, Alera, Oceanus, and Dissolution. Noah was currently gaining a more distinct connection with the Aeonic Haven of Dissolution, as anyone gaining such a distinction would only have an easier time while following the path of extremity sanctification. Ayame watched the scene of such grandeur as above her head. Minute traces of such authority formed as they paled in comparison to what Noah had surging into his soul, but they were there nonetheless to show her accomplishments. With this, she knew that what her grandfather had predicted would now come to fruition. Extremity sanctification would truly begin. The skies and land in the endless abyssal, thalassic caverns of nullity trembled and shattered for countless light years as if a cataclysm had arrived. The endless abyss hidden within it roared out with fervor as the abyssal sanctimonious lands that were deeply entrenched in the underside of dissolution. They began to rise. Boom! Space warped and twisted with this area as the epicenter. Sources of chaos running rampant all around as fantastically thick tendrils of dissolution began to rise from the depths of the abyss that were light years in length and diameter. These tendrils smashing onto the skies and terrain as the moment they did. The areas they touched seemingly became malleable and began to expand. The very earthen glacial floor expanded as if countless tectonic plates were shifting below it. All of this change prompted by the tendrils of dissolution, writhing out and expanding from this region and continuing throughout. Alongside this, the glacial floor split apart with utter glory, as from the depths below, one could see the rough yet glorious sheen of a vein begin to rise. The pulsing extremity vein of dissolution was rising from its depths ever so slowly as the very haven of dissolution split apart and expanded due to it. The expansiveness of this whole haven about to be increased by an unknown amount. As this occurred, the thick tentacles of dissolution caused sparks of anomalies to bloom, singularities that sometimes formed into planar seeds ready to bud into planes of existence, while other singularities pulsed with the light of aeonic treasures of extremity as they became concealed in the folding and expanding space, some becoming veiled deeply while others floated out grandly in the open. Chapter 2534, The Extremity Vein Rises. 2. Countless tremors spread across the Ionic Haven of Dissolution. The domains that used to be explored and conquered by the Lernaeans, Noblesse, Quasarians, and Planeswalkers were about to become minuscule and small points on the map. The process taking place being so fantastical that the vast majority of this haven would continue to be unexplored regions. As these tremors spread within this haven, word also spread as invisible tremors reached into the 6 other havens, the power lying in wait finally being roused as they began to move. In the Aeonic Haven of Genesis, a golden temple stood at the very peak of one of 100 verdant gold mountains. powerful auras prevalent within it as they shot to the skies at this moment. At the entrance of the Golden Temple, a hyperversal extremity floated out and gazed towards the expanse of grandeur and planes of existence littered out across the lands as behind him, dozens of apex aeonic life forms rose. And the mighty voice of the hyperversal extremity rang out. The time has come for you all to see whether extremity is within your grasp. If you cannot grasp it in this unfolding extremity sanctification, you may never have the chance to even try again. Words of caution and mystery rang out as there seemed to be a hidden meaning within them. But the apex aeonic life forms nodded without hesitation as the hyperversal extremity began to move. Let's go. Wah-wah! From this mountain, dazzling auras rose and went towards a faraway crack between the vast havens to arrive towards nowhere else other than dissolution. On another mountain, another party with slightly less apex aeonic life forms rose as one of them asked the hyperversal extremity leading them. Master, since many of our forces will be arriving there before the apex war of annihilation, we are supporting starts. Will we be adding any more of our apex aeonic life forms into it? We will observe and see before this small battle unfolds. If need be, we will, but this should be of little focus to you all. The reply was swift as the apex aeonic life forms nodded while they followed. Within the Genesis Institute of Extremity, within the Singularity Overseers, within the Cult of Endless Shadows, within the Sema clan, within the Avernus clan, within the Plum Sword of Extremity, inheritances across the aeonic havens of Andromeda, Elara, Oceanus, an innumerable cluster of forces waiting for the start of the expansion, and culmination of the last haven began to move at this moment as their seers or simply potent hyperversal extremities had long since sensed the rapid progression of this particular sanctification. They swarmed towards an expanding haven of dissolution as the initiation step came to an end, their arrival just happening to be a day before an apex war of annihilation took place, as it seemed there would be a much larger audience than what many anticipated. While waiting for the doors of the culmination step of extremity sanctification to open, how likely was it for these clusters of powerful apex aeonic life forms to come and view an unfolding apex war? The chance was extremely high in the infinite hyperversal haven. Noah's main body felt the glorious concepts and dynamis that the other part of his soul expanded, with him being able to express the boundaries up to the 9th layer, while the dynamis of extremity forged by Alexander would only be accessible to him when this part of his soul grew potent enough to accept their absolute seed, or perennial Yggdrasil of extremity. So he felt the terrible power of the Thanatos quintessential absolute dynamis of extremity with his main body, but he couldn't express its authority as it seemed abstruse and far away. But the boundary of infinity that was just expanded, he felt his endless mana churn ever faster since its conception. He felt the other resources within him flare and jump excitedly. He felt many-minute changes from the expansion of this single concept towards extremity, as he carefully gazed at its details while his figure moved. He floated across the space, busting with the verdant essence of prana, and appeared before his son, who rose up in respect. His main body remained unblemished like all others, as he even placed his absolute vitalistic clone of extremity on pause, almost as if he knew what was about to happen in advance. Noah smiled as he waved his hands and caused a dazzling crimson extremity panacea to appear, his voice masking its brilliance as he spoke. When I took this to solidify my foundation, I forged the unrecorded aeonic quintessential supreme being foundation. Forge your own path with it, and let's see how far you can go. From the last 2 crimson extremity panaceas, one had gone to Ayame, as the other went to Henry. The son of destiny grasped the crimson extremity panacea with a heavy heart of responsibility, as beside him, Adelanli smiled as she stared at father and son. After this, Noah's gaze turned to the vassals around him, who had their absolute vitalistic clones of extremity standing beside their main bodies, while releasing potent waves of power, his voice ringing out to address all of them, while his visage swirled with the power of absolute dynamis of extremity. You all have the foundation, circulation modus operandi, and all other tools that allow you to forge an absolute secret, yet you cannot. Way! The reason for this is that even though you were able to define yourselves with the concepts due to your foundations, you do not and have truly expressed these concepts with your aspects of existence. Yes, those closest to him were granted everything from him, as many of them had yet to even use the power of their new boundaries to form skills, attack, or even cast their planar domains. You all grasp the boundary of quintessence, but what quintessential feat have you enacted? You hold the boundary of loot, but have you taken down a myriad of enemies to see their very existence turned into caches of loot? If you truly wish to grasp an absolute dynamis of extremity, you must first utilize your newly granted authorities and build a sufficient amount of records with them, and paired with your extremity foundations, enacting an absolute dynamis of extremity then would only be a reality. They heard his words as their aspects of existence pulsed, and as if to hit the nail in the coffin, it just so happens that within a day, there will be an apex war with ultimate existences from lineages and inheritances who have yet to see the grandeur you all can express. In that battle, you all can create your records and enact your own legends for the eons to come. Boom! Waves of golden oraculum dynamis of extremity scattered out as the aspects of existence of Noah's people roared. From them, Rah! Roars and shouts of valor began to echo out as they got ready to delve into a grand war. Chapter 2535, The Extremity Vein Rises. Ericsson's eyes were like lanterns of singularities as he gazed at the massive and endless wall that didn't seem to want to decide on being solidified or liquefied in form. His beach attire standing out amidst the scene as his slippers were back on feet, shining with a glint of an apex aeonic relic. The wall before him radiated grandiose waves of dissolution as ever since the fundamental change began hours ago, which represented the last Crimson Extremity panacea being attained. This wall had remained just as it was now. Any word on who obtained the last Crimson Extremity panacea? He asked with sharp eyes as behind him, Reverend Emperors with extremity foundations built by obsidian reality panaceas floated protectively while a woman with round-rimmed glasses gazed towards a certain direction. There is a high probability that it was the self-titled true Emperor of Quintessence. A lot of his bodies haven't always been accounted for, and if there is anyone who can silently take it away. The last extremity panacea had been whisked away without any grand battles, with even its eruption being silent and unseen, as many scions suspiciously gazed towards a single being. If not for him, Master Ericsson would have surely grasped one of the Crimson Extremity panaceas. A scion of the Sema clan spoke with reservation within the group as Ericsson laughed while waving his hand. Haha, no need for it. I already altered the probability of the Obsidian Extremity panacea I devoured to grant me similar effects to a Crimson Extremity panacea. My current extremity foundation should only be a step behind his. He spoke with confidence as he knew he couldn't rival it. After all, he was not able to distort the probability enough at his current stage to birth something as pristine as an absolute dynamis of extremity. But this should change greatly when he became an apex aeonic life. As he thought of this, he turned his gaze behind him and saw hundreds of pillars of multicolored lights blooming like suns all across this region. Each of these pillars showed extremity meridians being formed, the vast majority ranging from 6 or 18, as it was all beings who had acquired an extremity panacea and had a guaranteed chance of becoming apex aeonic life forms. It was the process of scions undergoing apexification en masse, as they wanted to be entirely ready to participate in the culmination step that was about to unfold. Are you all ready to start too? He spoke towards the Sema clan scions behind him as they nodded. All right, boys and girls. He cracked his neck and stretched his body as the light blue beach attire on him pulsed with glorious waves of hockey. The next stage to come will have an easy and rapid path of progression across the stage of an apex aeonic life form as in recorded history. Those who benefit the most from the initiation step and the culmination step will in no doubt achieve hyperversal extremity at the extremity step of extremity sanctification. No arduous hard work for millions of years. Just be outstanding enough to grab the opportunities of extremity sanctification, as with enough fortune, You may even be standing alongside the elders of the Sima clan in the months and years to come. His words caused the eyes of the Sima clan scions to burn as their bodies pulsed with rhythms of power and battle. Ericsson's face turned serious while he spoke, as immense bravery and honor leaked from his tan skin, his voice radiating out to even be heard in the surroundings, as Noah's visage in the far distance that was observing the vast wall of dissolution turned around to gaze at this scene. We of the Sima clan are the protectors of the Seven Hades. We make the malignancies that wish to harm us run in fear as our power is absolute. The rhythm of the Sima clan scions behind him formed into a booming sound that emanated out with his words. So live up to the name and standing of the Sima clan. Obtain the strength required to continue our holy mission for the years to come. Undergo apexification. Ho! Radiance shone on the scions behind him. Hundreds of extremity meridians flourished in a grand show of power, as apart from this region, all other locations had the emerging light of extremity meridians blooming as thousands of scions took the step forward to get ready for wonders to come. In one corner, the visage of Shadow could be seen near the wall of Doom. They stayed close to Noah's reified sources of extremity. Many of them also shone with the light of extremity meridians, as some had even successfully finished their apexification and wondrously felt the power of an apex aeonic life form. What was frightening, though, was that some thought the being who had led them here this whole time would feel less like a mystery and an unwavering existence, as those who had become apex aeonic life forms gazed towards Noah's reified sources of extremity. With their new power, they expected to be able to at least see through him and not feel the sense of suppression. But, their gazes trembled in shock as their more attuned senses as apex aeonic life forms warned them of danger when they gazed at Noah's bodies. The sense of oppression he gave off before becoming maddening. Even after advancing as apex aeonic life forms, they could actually not even touch a fraction of this being's power. What the hell was this? There was no answer to come, as not just them, many scions becoming apex aeonic life forms, and wishing to break the feeling of inadequacy they held whenever they gazed at Noah's visage before would try to send their wills over. But they would only receive another unfathomable shock that few would be able to forget in their lives. Meanwhile, Noah's bodies were in front of the huge wall of the hands of his quintessential emperor of extremity placed on it as he rippled with its massive waves of authority, thinking of even more audacious things like passing through this impassable wall without even having undergone it. Chapter 25:36. Glorious Apex Battle. Within the vast haven of dissolution itself, a shocking scene could be seen as one could appreciate the outer layer of an utterly majestic vein extending infinitely across, tendrils of dissolution arcing across it, constantly changing the space around it. It seemed like less than half of the extremity vein of dissolution had risen from the abyss as it showed the progression of its its appearance filled with grandeur and mystery for any who gazed at it. Astonishing to view every time, isn't it? In a region with concentrated tendrils of gloom and nullity, near the apex battlefield, where the apex war of annihilation between two factions was soon to take place, a voice of wonder rang out as a humanoid figure adorned in a white robe with bright gold wings erupting behind her back at the sea. Around her, similar humanoids with golden wings could be seen as they were of the celestial thunderbirds of the celestial thunder inheritance. It still places to the records of the extremity sanctification of Andromeda or Oceanus we've been shown, Priestess Persephone. Their extremity veins were something to behold. Another voice chimed in as Priestess Persephone shook her head with a smile. You all have yet to see this extremity sanctification fully unfold. It had been recorded that the last sanctification was something surpassing any other. And this difference should be felt more in the culmination stage, the knowledge that many inheritances collected before will not produce one. But towards the end of her words, beside with a sense of sadness, the will and the will of many apex aeonic life forms, veiled by a golden light gazed in the far distance, for such an event to occur at the same time as a war of bloodbath? Why would the adjudicator allow something like this? Why must they fight people of blood when much more terrifying enemies barely being held at bay? Her eyes held a light of love for all living things as she felt saddened by the bloodbath that would soon follow. I understand the feelings of Priestess, but where are the rest of the forces for this apex war? Another voice from among the celestial thunderbirds rang out curiously as they gazed at the apex battlefield. There, one could see that on the side with a brilliant obsidian runic equator reading Noblesse, legions of forces could be seen enacted as they floated on the silver crimson skies with valor. Many legions being seen as each one was led by a few apex aeonic life forms. The vast majority of them were composed of Noblesse, but on the forefront, one could see the commanders identifiable as apex aeonic life forms in the Genesis Institute of Extremity and Singularity Overseers. They had increased in number, especially so for the Singularity Overseers, as the slightly pale figure of Zeitgeist could be seen with a somber expression as he looked ahead. Apart from them, there were the relaxed apex aeonic life forms from an unidentifiable faction, and yet these beings were the ones who emanated the most power. It felt stifling for even some of the wills arriving and watching from a distance, as the main cause of it was from a single being who silently throbbed with the aura of destruction. Ah, Pooch! This was the grandness on one side of the apex battlefield, but on the other, few apex aeonic life forms from the Cult of Endless Shadows could be seen as their gazes weren't the happiest. One of them turning towards the far back and sending out a message towards none other than the deposed Lernaean Emperor, who wished to take the reins and forge relations with the Cult of Endless Shadows first. He was backed by 4 ancestral Lernaean apex aeonic life forms, as he didn't run away when word of the apex war spread, his gaze cold as many hidden criticisms were unsaid. Why aren't the forces of Lernaeans here yet? This was the message Roan received from the primeval Shadow Elders up front as he scoffed. Didn't they all side with the so-called true Emperor of Quintessence? Now they would also face the same consequences of his actions. As sad as it was to see, they might just be witnessing the end of the Lernaean lineage in this coming day. But still, Roan was here. Even if the self-acclaimed true Emperor of Quintessence turned tail and ran, Roan would be here to defend the honor of the world. Two sides of an apex battlefield. One was filled, while the other felt barren. Every now and then, new wills would sweep over it, as a few forces from those arriving here across different havens heard of or knew about a small apex war sparking out as they came to watch. It was like a car crash or a collapse of planes of existence. Some beings just couldn't pull their eyes away from the horror. In the infinite hyperversal haven, serene waves of authorities and dynamis of extremity pulsed like a silent storm within the depths of the Prana Alithian haven. Even though his vassals could not yet create an absolute seat of extremity, forming a dynamis with 2 to 3 boundaries forcefully was still possible due to their extremity foundations. And to go even further, each of his vassals' main bodies had assimilated obsidian or golden extremity panaceas from the many that Noah had collected, elevating their foundations even further. They all prepared thoroughly for the apex war of annihilation that would occur within less than a day, with Noah continuing to work the most. At this moment, multiple clones were within another area of the infinite hyperversal haven that was surrounded by the golden light of loot and the crimson light of flames. Glorious forges burning with intense heat could be seen organized in a curved linear formation as if they were a stellar system, each one pulsing with the light of relics, as armored breastplates, briefs, helmets, boots, gloves, a numerous of relics radiating a light even more intense than apex aeonic relics could be seen. The hyperversal blacksmith's forge was pulsing with a grand light of quintessence as said items were being forged to be equipped by an already horrifying army. Chapter 2537, A Glorious Apex Battlefield. The light of heat and loot permeated all around as the isolated domain holding a myriad of forges pulsed with light. The authorities of natural laws and decreta surged wondrously in the surroundings as they flowed into every forge, their might flowing into every relic being forged. The materials going into these forges were formed across the infinite hyperversal haven as it continued to expand and proliferate with spiritual herbs as well. The relics coming out exceeding any apex aeonic relics Noah had seen in the body of science. Every few seconds, one of the massive forges would shine bright and spit out a dazzling relic that radiated pure wonder. Along with Noah, there was one other being in the hyperversal blacksmith's forge who had called for a recess from dual cultivation as her heart couldn't take it anymore, and she had sensed the pulse of loot light occurring in this location as she was drawn here. A light of the Thesaurus' absolute dynamis of extremity covered her body as she gazed at the mass production of fantastical loot and spoke out with mesmerized eyes. Now this is fucking gorgeous. It was! Each one radiated pure wonder and loot light as before Noah's will. There was an array of prompts that continued to repeat over and over again until he put them on the sidelines, waiting only for a single one that showed the immense progress being made. The quintessential great axe of the loot harvester has been forged. The quintessential looter's breastplate has been forged. The quintessential briefs of greed have been forged. The quintessential sea gold boots have been forged. The quintessential wraps of Midas have been forged. The quintessential helm of atonement has been forged. The complete set of quintessential loot seekers' regalia has been forged. The relics being forged were being mass-produced, as each one shone with a milky white gold luster, the breastplates having been branded with a cerulean infinity symbol, while the helms held burning blue flames that seemed pulsing with the flame. The color of milky white and gold was dominant on the rest of the set pieces that made the quintessential loot seeker regalia set, with a cerulean shading appearing here and there. Noah was about to view their astounding details. Hold on! As if Aurelia could read his thoughts, she stopped him while her body began to radiate the authority of the Thesaurus' absolute dynamis of extremity. The blessing of loot! Pure halcyon grandeur pulsed from her and exploded out like a seed, going on to cover the hundreds of relics making up the quintessential loot seeker's entire set, as well as the myriad of forges floating throughout. Ha! Now let's see! Aurelia sighed with happiness and excitement as her fair hands reached out to grab one of the quintessential great axes of the loot harvester. Quintessential great axter. A hyperversal apex eye relic, forged under the fires of the hyperversal blacksmith's forge that faced the constant infusion and refinements of natural laws and freedom. It has been further elevated under the light of the blessing of loot by the holder of the Thesaurus' absolute dynamis of extremity, as its capabilities and potential have only scaled upwards. When equipped, it currently grants the boost of plus 100 quintessential hyperversal damage values, plus 5% lifesteal of enemies' maximum vitality values per hit, halcyon flammability effect on hit, plus 50% chance to trigger Chaos Loot Nova on hit. A Chaos Loot Nova deals 500% of the base damage value of the relic as an area of effect damage value, plus 50% increased rarity of loot, and a plus 50% increased quantity of loot. This item is only one of the 6 that makes up the quintessential loot seeker's entire set. The more set items collected, the grander the effects. Ah! You see it? It was already a high-quality loot, but by blessing of loot, raised its boosts by 25% or 50% at the very least. When I fully converge through Thesaurus' absolute dynamis of extremity, I should be able to enhance a relic by over 100%. Aurelia twirled the great axe of the loot harvester in her hands with utmost excitement, as one could see the fanaticism of loot in her eyes. She hugged this milky gold great axe that looked like it could split a plane of existence as it was buried in her blessed chest. Her eyes shifting around excitedly as she beckoned and caused one of the dazzling white gold breastplates with a blue infinity symbol on their center float towards them. A hyperversal peak eye relic forged under the fires of the hyperversal blacksmith's forge that faced the constant imbuing and refinements of natural laws and decreta. It has been further elevated under the light of the blessing of loot. When equipped, it currently grants the boost of plus 150 quintessential hyperversal defense values, plus 150 quintessential hyperversal vitality values, 25% absolute damage nullification, boundary essences, below the 10th layer cannot bypass through. 5% passive heal of maximum vitality values every 10 seconds, plus 25% increased rarity of loot, and a plus 25% increased quantity of loot. This item is only one of the 6 that makes up the quintessential Loot Seeker's attire set. Ah! Aurelia also hugged the vibrant breastplate excitedly as she breathed with excitement while gazing at the hundreds of similar loot around her. It filled her with such profound happiness that she didn't even know what to do. She felt content. She felt at peace. Her origin pulsed as her eye closed, the rate of convergence of the Thesaurus absolute dynamis of extremity being urged forth ever faster, as after gazing and blessing all the loot here, she seemed to have entered a state of epiphany. Noah shook his head at this loot fanatic, who even exceeded his own enthusiasm, as he called 6 of the hyperversal peak eye relics that made a complete set before him. Ruination was also considered a hyperversal peak eye relic, and yet, her capabilities were more than 10 times with pure stats alone, as her characteristics and abilities were even more monstrous. But when these relics were worn together to grant the set effect, their benefits were also astonishing. Chapter 2538, A Glorious Apex Battlefield. 3. Quintessential Loot Seeker's Regalia Set, an upheaval of a reality-altering effect brought to fruition by the infinite hyperversal Haven. When 2 set items of the quintessential Loot Seeker's Regalia are equipped, a loot barrier forms around the body as it can absorb 750 Apex Ionic damage values, and it regenerates fully within 1 second of being destroyed. When 4 set items are equipped, there is a 25% chance upon killing an enemy to cause an explosion of loot that grants 1000% more loot. When 6 set items are equipped, any enemy killed grants plus 1000 quintessential loot experience points that can be utilized towards the progression of boundaries up to the 13th boundary layer. A quintessential banner of loot will also form above you as it adds plus 750 quintessential hyperversal loot damage values to all attacks and abilities you release. A third effect for wearing all 6 set items is currently still budding from the blessing of loot. Equipping all 6 items of the set granted fantastical boons that exceeded anything that Apex Ionic relics could grant. A single set item and its effects exceeded what multiple weak Apex Ionic life forms could do, as even their values wouldn't reach the mere boons they granted as a set. This was something Noah had forged in relics in the past, and it appeared here again, as when he adorned his vassals that were already holding extremity foundations and exceeding normal Apex Ionic life forms with such ridiculous hyperversal Apex Eye relics, especially with their set effects. It was a really bad future to imagine for their enemies. And this was only the first version of hyperversal relics that he would forge. As the infinite hyperversal Haven grew and its features became more robust, even deadlier relics that were making their way to becoming armaments of extremity began to appear. Noah monitored all of this carefully as his voice emanated out. "Is the other side ready?" he asked serenely, as from his surroundings. "Yes, Master. Here are the results so far." The voice of the infinite hyperversal Haven urged out. A part of his will shone as it was given a vision of a veiled region within the infinite hyperversal Haven, a region within the depths of its source. There, the visage of Hyperion could be seen floating calmly as waves of pristine power at the Apex Ionic lifeform level reverberated out. Alongside him, massive hyperversal enders of extremity could be seen as Noah and the infinite hyperversal Haven had been busy. Other beings worked hard for their lineage and domains, but did anyone work as hard as Noah? Yes, his mana was infinite as his resource usage was absolutely minimal. But the things he did in a matter of days were things that some hyperversal extremities could not complete in years. And in addition to everything else he worked on these past days, the Enders of Nature was another glorious project. Their realms and origins were reconfigured and reconstructed, granted Extremity Foundation, and then they were advanced to Apex Ionic lifeforms as the defenders of the infinite hyperversal Haven were truly stepping up to their role. Besides Hyperion, forms of regal dragons, phoenixes, keelings, cosmic serpents, singularity tortoises, and many more stretched out left, right, and behind him as their eyes shone with power that waited to be expressed. They simply waited to exert their strength. With this and many more things, Noah felt pristinely prepared for the war to come. The goal wasn't to have a hard fight with tension on who would be the winner. The goal was to dominate the other side, so devastatingly that others would have to think twice about ever moving against them. But of course, things never went according to plan. And this was why his strength had to not only be overpowered, but utterly intense and obscene to account for any possibilities that may happen in the future to come. In addition to the quintessential loot seekers regalia sets and the hyperversal enders of extremity, Noah was also working to expand his boundaries to the highest possible level he could. The loot he obtained from the abyssal sanctimonious lands already brought towards ruination to be multiplied and utilized by him. There were even the grand fruits of extremity from the perennial Yggdrasils of extremity in his soul for the expansion of his boundaries. Thereafter, there was one additional thing he had to do, one additional dynamis of extremity he had to forge. Thereafter, the rest would be history. In the haven of Penumbra, in a tiny speck of this endlessly vast vault of extremity, past rotating clusters of multiple major planes of existence, within a unique plane of extremity modified by the dense, hyperversal extremity authority of shadows. Massive obsidian castles the size of cosmos floated like bright moons in the starry space, their edges making it seem like they were on floating stellar bodies that dripped off a pure obsidian essence like endless waterfalls. The particles of this pure black light gathered below into immaculately flowing rivers that form the runic écriture of shadows. The castles rotated around one central fortress, shining with crystalline grandeur, its size exceeding that of average realities, as it seemed to hold pockets of dazzling cosmos within its walls, along with other smaller castles that held an innumerable number of beings moving about. Massive ships and vessels could be seen stationed or moving around the floating castles and the fortress that was known as the Shadow Fortress. The Shadow Fortress within the tenebrous plane, immutable extremity, where a core portion of the economy and power of the cult of endless shadows flowed. Materials, relics, aeonic treasures of extremity, and much more were constantly being imported or sent out as the cult of endless shadows took hold of anything under the banner with the quality of shadows and darkness. The auras of boundary expansion realm experts were in abundance. The shining might of apex aeonic lifeforms being felt in every floating castle as within the fortress, the heavy aura of hyperversal extremities blazed. Noah's gaze took in all of these scenes, while hyperversal extremity, Gabriella took him toward a portion of the massive Shadow Fortress, her voice ringing out to primeval elder Silas, who had accompanied Noah this whole time. Silas, you joined the group, leaving with your master to participate in the culmination step. I'll handle things from here. When you get back, see if more Shadow Elders need to reinforce the side of our friend here. Her words were irrefutable as Silas nodded respectfully, giving Noah a side glance while sending him a mental message as he disappeared. Whatever you do, please act with etiquette when interacting with hyperversal extremities, especially Extremity Gabriella. His mental message fell on deaf ears as Noah acted as if he hadn't heard them, nodding towards Extremity Gabriella as he continued forward. There won't be a need for any more forces of the cult of endless shadows to be sent over for this Apex war. Even the current ones there won't be needed. A smile appeared on Extremity Gabriella's face as she spoke with serenity. Are you sure about that? I hear the Apex battlefield still doesn't have even a shred of your forces. While the other side, information was constantly sent over on what was happening with the Apex battlefield in the Haven of Dissolution. Many were inquisitive about the being who had forged an absolute seed of extremity. What would he reveal on the Apex battlefield? And why was his side vacant when the battle was nearly upon him? Chapter 2539, A Glorious Apex Battlefield. One side of the Apex battlefield was filled with legions led by powerful Apex Aeonic lifeforms, and yet the other side only had a few Apex Aeonic lifeforms as it looked extremely barren. You would know more than others, but most beings are under the assumption that you will lose in this battle, but that it doesn't matter to you, since the adjudicator of dissolution has either already put safeguards or will simply make a move when the time comes. The voice of hyperversal extremity Gabriella rang out after she brought up the topic of the Apex battlefield. Then most beings would be wrong. Noah replied with ease as he took her words lightly, their figures landing on a massive black-white platform that had the character of S inscribed on the very floor. Rows of apex aeonic life forms, pulsing with ferocious eyes spaced out in this region, as they only bowed respectfully towards Gabriella. The platform they were on led deeper into the Shadow Fortress. And yet, Gabriella remained standing on the S character as she motioned with her hands to release a blinding light of authority. The S releasing a bright spatial light as her figure and Noah's figure disappeared. The Shadow Fortress was too vast. Each of its myriad parts were divided into the abodes of different hyperversal extremities who led apex aeonic life forms. Here lay the focused forces of the cult of endless shadows as far away from this location. Their other domains had their own hyperversal extremities stationed and maintaining their dominion. The S, teleportation room Noah, and hyperversal extremity Gabriella had activated brought them into a domain within the depths of the Shadow Fortress. The size of a small world, Noah gazing around to see the floor was formed by thick hyperversal extremity authority that looked like endless swirling black rose petals. The ends of the domain held a darkness he couldn't see across, but the potency of hyperversal extremity authority in this domain could not be looked down upon. Welcome to one of my domains, Oswan. Here we can discuss exactly what future you see for yourself and what outcome you're seeking with this Apex war. Extremity Gabriella's voice was radiant as it rang out, Noah's brows rising as he asked lightly. Just that. It was very clear what he was asking for with his words, as the reply was equally quick. Oh, do you mean the armament of extremity? The shadow sword? I know full well of your oath and what it means. Wah! As she spoke, she waved her hands as an illusory scene appeared above them, showing an utterly magnificent outline of a sword that was devouring all sources of light. One could feel profound palpation just from gazing at it, as it seemed like a smooth ticket towards extremity. Unfortunately, one of our prized primeval shadow elders, a lineage above Silas, is breaking through from the cusp of the 17th boundary layer, as he can already sense hyperversal extremity authority. Gazing upon the shadow sword may just have to be after this Apex war. She smiled sweetly as she spoke, nobody being aware on what she truly thought or why she did what she was doing. The cherished shadow sword would be gazed at and grasped at the end of the Apex war of annihilation, as this was within the bounds of the oath he made with Silas. So he remained calm at Extremity Gabriella's words as she continued. I instead want to get past the bullshit and understand which group you will stand on if you continue to rise with your current brilliance. Extremity. Gabriella seemed much more straightforward as she was looking at things from the perspective of the gains of the cult of endless shadows. Would Noah stand to join them or another faction in the future to come when he had even received an invitation from a scion of the Sema clan? At her question, Noah smiled and replied sharply, I'm afraid that such a question will only truly be answered after this Apex war. The same words she had uttered when it related to the Shadow Sword. But Noah wasn't just speaking here, as at the end of this war, all those watching would understand just which group the true Emperor of Quintessence belonged to. And at this moment, the Cult of Endless Shadows wondered. Away from this haven, the Genesis Institute of Extremity wondered. And even further away, a scion of the Sema clan and a scion of the Infinite Extremity wondered. Many beings could only guess the results about to unfold, as in the aeonic haven of dissolution. The hours trickled by as the time of the apex war of annihilation neared. In the infinite hyperversal haven, under the covers of the golden light of the oraculum dynamis of extremity, the true Emperor of Quintessence continued his preparations. With every passing hour, he was ever closer to his goals as he hit all the milestones he wished to. In the last hours before the set time of the apex war of annihilation, too many changes occurred with him and his body of Alexander King, along with his son completing a profound apexification. They were stupendous changes that would be felt firsthand by the enemies they were about to face. The skies were bathed with a crimson-silver radiance as tendrils of nullity and ruin dominated, their excellence becoming more focused as if they could feel what was to come. Their light showed the expansive apex battlefield below, as on the side under the banner of Noblesse, legions could be seen stretched out as far as the eyes could see. The time for the Apex War neared, and yet the situation didn't seem to change much for the other side, as less than 10 sparse auras of Apex Aeonic life forms could be felt. Can this even be considered an Apex War? It just seems like a one-sided stomping is about to occur, with all the reputation this Osmond has garnered for forging an absolute seed of extremity about to come crashing down. Far from the bounds of the Apex battlefield, crimson clouds of ruin were artificially formed as atop them. Luxurious thrones were enacted as Apex Aeonic lifeforms from inheritances sat atop them. Some were on floating ships or vessels serenely parked in space, while others formed their own domains and watched the unfolding events from afar, as their opinions had already begun to flow out. Chapter 2540, A Glorious Apex Battlefield 5. Still nothing from him? In the northern region past the Apex battlefield, the figure of Ericsson's aped Aeonic soul clone could be seen on a throne atop a golden stellar vessel in the form of a leaf, as the changes from him over the last hours were utterly drastic. No, Master Ericsson, his other bodies are still floating before the wall of dissolution in the depths of the extremity vein. Behind him, a reply came from the Sema clan scion as another resonant voice came beside Ericsson soon after. There's still time before the Apex War. He'll likely arrive with a bang. He just seems like that sort of dude. The voice stemmed from Atlas of the Plum Sword of Extremity, as besides Ericsson's throne, the figures of many prominent scions who had participated in the initiation steps could be seen on their own thrones. Ericsson had invited their Apex Aeonic soul clones over, as apart from Atlas, even the visage of Lodovico and Ayame could be seen among others. Only their Apex Aeonic soul clones were here, as their main bodies had already met up with their core forces that entered the Haven of Dissolution, each of them receiving the resources of their inheritance on top of what they gained in the initiation steps of extremity solidification, to rapidly stabilize their power as Apex Aeonic life forms and elevate their boundaries past the 10th layer. Those from truly powerful inheritances, or those part of the 7 clans, were gaining even more boons as they basked in the aura of their hyperversal extremities, being given unique resources to aid them in forging their dynamis of extremity. The wall of dissolution did not crumble down as the extremity vein rose ever so slowly, even now, the culmination step not yet unfolding, as a decent number of the myriad factions came to the periphery of the Apex battlefield to watch. Some inheritances considered it beneath them, as their forces already entered the extremity vein of dissolution, and stood before the massive wall that stopped all else. The mere presence of renowned names from factions like the Sema clan, Infinite Extremity, and Plum Sword of Extremity being here observing caused a few more eyes to be drawn over. And the golden leaf-shaped vessel Ericsson and others sat on, the visage of Ayame that had been quiet this whole time had her eyes flash with brilliance as she voiced out. It seems the suspense and questions are about to come to an end. The moment her words finished, on the side shining under the banner of Lernian, space fluctuated as a majestic aura blazed forth. The wills of many watching eyes were roused as they focused on the Apex battlefield. There, with all of his glory, the single figure of Noah's main body appeared as fantastically. Those watching truly affirmed he had yet to advance as an Apex Aeonic life form. His exceedingly handsome face was apparent to all, as he was adorned in a light blue emperor's robe, seeming like he was going on a simple stroll as he gazed into the battlefield ahead of him that instantly blazed with a terrifying intent for battle the moment he had appeared. At the center of this battlefield, the figure of Commander Vladik rose from the legions below, as after seeing Noah, his figure became surrounded by a brilliant light as he bellowed out, "Osmond! Wah!" The being who had crushed Uriel's soul right before him. He actually showed up as Vladik almost wanted to tear the veil, stopping the two sides from beginning battle right away. Yet the being he considered his life and death enemy barely spared him a glance before shaking his head. What Commander Vladik didn't know was that Noah had already read of his death from a dumbrated viewpoint, as he was already considered a dead man walking. His figure instead floated ever closer to the thin, transparent wall that distinguished between the two sides. The figures of the Shadow Elders and Roan, who had already been on this battlefield, coming up towards him, as Roan's voice was the first to emanate out. Before Silas's words finished, Noah's regal voice thundered out as he stopped while his facial muscles twisted in anger. "This is the precipice you have brought our Lernaean lineage to after taking the seat of Emperor? Complete annihilation by shut up." Before Silas's words finished, Noah's regal voice thundered out as he stopped while his facial muscles twisted in anger. Among the primeval Shadow Elders coming by, the figure of Silas could be seen as he had returned from the haven of Penumbra to take the lead for the forces of the Cult of Endless Shadows aiding Noah. Depending on how events unfolded in the next few moments, he would be given a command by the hyperversal extremities of the Cult of Endless Shadows, watching in a hidden space on whether to increase the forces of the Cult of Endless Shadows and bring legions of them into the battlefield. So he didn't say anything at this moment, as he watched Noah's figure ignore everyone else on this side and float right at the transparent veil separating the two forces. He gazed at the sea of legions before him that would have frightened any common apex Aeonic life form, and yet his eyes held no fear as he turned his head to the legions led by elders of the Singularity Overseers and Genesis Institute of Extremity. He even gazed in the far distance where the figure of a being surrounded by a palpating crimson aura of destruction could be seen, surrounded by extremely powerful apex Aeonic life forms. He looked at all of them as under the banner of many eyes, his resonant voice rang out. "Before this apex war begins, I will give an opportunity for all those who do not have life and death conflict with me to leave." His words were a surprise to many, as Noah's gaze was directed to the forces of Genesis Institute of Extremity and Singularity Overseers, who were supporting the side of the noblest. Before any insignificant reactions began, he continued, "Because for those who do remain in this apex war of annihilation, they shall be branded as enemies that cannot exist under the same haven. This doesn't just include those who are present here, but the forces of inheritance they represent. Any single existence associated with an inheritance on this battlefield. Your presence here means that your entire inheritance is declaring war on me and my livelihood." Boom! Shocking words that caused many auras to burst with grandiosity zoomed out, the eyes of many apex Aeonic life forms constricting as an immense silence descended, only to be broken down by the true Emperor of Quintessence once more, his cerulean Emperor's robes making him seem like a celestial emperor advising the masses. The armies of the Genesis Institute of Extremity, the Singularity Overseers, and even the veiled scions of the Avernus clan, thinking they can hide themselves. His eyes landed on every force he was talking about, until they ultimately locked upon Akuch and his people, as their eyes blazed with brilliance at being called out like this. Noah had long since found out their affiliation from the mutated entities he killed in the Extremity vein, as well as his probing with adumbrated viewpoint. But his words caused waves as some beings gazed shockingly towards the visage of Akuch and others. The Avernus clan is involved in this? Is this appropriate? Many minds began to buzz as the face of Noah didn't pay attention. He gazed at the legions before him, continued as behind him. A spatial light began to shine as it seemed like his armies were being called forth. "If a single one of your forces remains on this battlefield when the Apex War starts, then I will take it as a proclamation of war on my and my whole lineage. It means that the Genesis Institute of Extremity, the Singularity Overseers, and the Avernus clan are declaring war on me and becoming deadly enemies. It means that after this war, I will not cease until these two inheritances and clan are deconstructed to the last being remaining." Boom! Chapter 2541. Violating Common Sense. 1. If they were to participate in this war, they would be branded his mortal enemies, as he would not rest until the Genesis Institute of Extremity, Singularity Overseers, and the Avernus clan were wiped out from existence. This being actually dared to say such words boldly under the eyes of many prominent inheritances here. His cerulean robe glimmered with majesty as he continued. "This is an apex war of annihilation. Any lineage and factions on this battlefield, I hold the right of annihilation. any hyperversal extremities from the Genesis Institute of Extremity, Singularity Overseers, and Avernus Clan. My words are for you to make a decision now. You have lived long enough to come across entities and phenomena that even you do not understand. I assure you that this junction is one of them. When the war starts, everything thereafter is irreversible. You have until it starts to decide. As soon as he finished, the blinding spatial light that had begun to bloom and covered the region behind him became clear as astonishing auras unveiled themselves. 1, 2, 20. One blazing aura of apex aeonic life form after another blared forth as they weren't weak ones. At the very forefront, a young man adorned in a milky white armament could be seen, his breastplate swinging radiantly with a blue infinity symbol as in his hands. A burning quintessential helm of atonement was held. His hair shone with blue, black, and gold radiance as his eyes carried a deep emerald hue of an absolute vitalistic clone of extremity. The pure power he released was suffocating, as it far exceeded any common apex aeonic life forms. Those watching from afar and about to erupt up in clamor and shock at Noah's dazzling words, finding their mouths tied and unable to speak, as their eyes constricted in different levels of surprise and shock. From the appearance of Henry Osmont alone, his blaring pressure alone seemed to be at upper levels of power that would only be present on grand primeval elders of inheritances who led squadrons of apex aeonic life forms. But this wasn't the main point of surprise about this being. It was the fact that the armament his body glimmered with exceeded any apex aeonic relics as many eyes blinked, wondering whether these beings were fitted with quasi-extremity relics. The only thing they didn't feel from these terrifying armaments being traces of hyperversal extremity authority, marking them as such. What was astonishing was that the dozens of apex aeonic life forms to appear behind the appearance of Henry all wore similar armaments, glaring with a shining aura of brilliance. Above their heads, the quintessential banner of Loot could be seen as a single illusory gold character signifying Loot, blazed with ecstatic power and brilliance. It was the quintessential Loot Seeker's regalia set that all of them were adorned in, gazing upon gazes, counting 200 of these oppressively powerful apex aeonic life forms, as each of them held a quintessential great axe of the Loot Harvester in their hands. It was a breathless scene. It was a beautiful scene that felt as if time had stopped. Besides Henry, the visage of the Emperor Penguin could be seen covered entirely by the quintessential Loot Seeker's regalia set, as near them, Barbados was present. Above Henry's head, a bouncing blue slime could be seen as its eyes shimmered with a sly smile that seemed to gaze at everything around it. Eowyn, Ophelia, the humanoid form of the Kraken, Kazuhiko, Oathkeeper, the Sword Emperor, a myriad of beings who had been with Noah this whole time, got the grand opportunity to be here as their appearance made the grand apex aeonic life forms that the Legion's opposites. It was a little lacking in brilliance. But this wasn't all. Just when the spatial light died down, another one even more dazzling appeared, as near the radiant legion of 200 apex aeonic life forms, the appearance of a golden-haired Katarina Aurelia Whispers. She sighed out calmly as she gazed around coolly, her surroundings also flashing with light, as the appearance of the true Emperor of Genesis appeared beside her. They were followed by the appearance of Lucia, the mad apex Emperor Caesar, and the other Lernaean apex aeonic life forms that had bent the knee to have their realms reconstructed. When they appeared, they were also decorated in the quintessential Loot Seeker's regalia sets, as the auras of Aurelia and Orion felt even more obscene than the Legion of 200 that had appeared first. It was to the extent that Orion, Roan's voice came out in utter shock as he actually felt his soul be pummeled by a profound sense of oppression when he looked at Orion and Aurelia, as if their power was so much higher that they could extinguish him with a single tap of their finger. Not too far from Roan, Grand Primeval Elder Silas gazed on in shock as he found these beings he had met before. He questioned whether he could withstand a few of their strikes and come out unscathed. It had only been a few days. What the hell happened? Who were all of these apex aeonic life forms? And where did they come from? Most of all, why were they all under the banner of a single being who hadn't even undergone apexification? The advancing commander Vladik, who had risen from the center of the legions, came to a stop before he reached the transparent barrier as his eyes opened wide with incredulity. The number of apex aeonic life forms on the other side held no legions of reverend emperors or those in the boundary expansion realm, who only held boundaries up to the 9th layer. But the apex aeonic life forms alone were nearly 10 times the number that were contained in the whole Nobles lineage. This was a maddening thought and reality to see as suddenly him going forward as the commander to fearlessly stand opposite to Noah near the transparent barrier did not seem so enticing. The silence in the surroundings was deafening, as after Noah's words and the arrival of just some of his forces, those observing were utterly gobsmacked. And at this moment, the roiling skies filled with ruin and nullity began to seethe and buzz. Chapter 2542, Violating Common Sense. 2. This was your trump card? In the isolated space that seemed to be far above the skies of dissolution, the veiled figure of the adjudicator of dissolution rang out towards Noah's clone.